2001: A Space Odyssey. 2001: A Space Odyssey is a film with ambiguity. This attracted the elite culture audiences of the 1960s and has spawned various interpretations of this film since then, meaning this has been discussed for over 50 years. In the more recent years via new means, such as YouTube videos and internet conspiracy theories. This being the case, 2001 is vastly diluted with varying ways of viewing the film, making this film complex to analyse and study without the understanding of the cultural theorists. In this video, I will touch upon Marxism, narrative structure, and structuralism. To understand 2001: A Space Odyssey, we first need to understand the climate of cinema in 1968 and put ourselves in the mindset of both a casual viewer and a media enthusiast. The mass audience, or average Joe, in the 1960s were going to see popular films like James Bond or Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. In these films, you are fed the story and relevant information through simple storytelling and simplistic characters that drives the narrative forward and doesn't ask any more of the audience. Imagine this. You go into a screening of a new film which has no previous alliterations or literature, and then the film you're presented with, 2001: A Space Odyssey, is the complete opposite of the cinematic norm in 1968. A James Bond film will show two people going into a room, a fight, and then James Bond wins, and you see the defeated opponent, so it is clear what has occurred. To relate this to 2001: A Space Odyssey, the comparison would be one of the main characters slowly walks into a room, another character enters shortly after, both wearing astronaut costumes. Then there is an external shot of the initial character leaving the room with the glass of his helmet shattered. The other character is not seen again, and no explanation is given for what happened in the room. It is left to the interpretation of the viewer, which alienates the audience and can distract from the film. As it's 1968, there is no internet or literature available to illustrate an explanation. This can turn off the stereotypical popular cultural viewer who typically sees cinema as escapism after a day of work and doesn't want to then have to go away and study it further in order to understand it, whereas it will inspire the more highbrow viewer to theorize. 2001: A Space Odyssey can be interpreted as a collection of short stories which the author Arthur C. Clarke had previously written, such as Encounters in the Dawn and The Sentinel, which helped form the story of 2001: A Space Odyssey as is presented in the film. The construction of the film comprises of 3 acts: Dawn of Man, From the Earth to the Moon, and Jupiter Mission. These can be interpreted as 3 individual short stories which are seen to be interwoven by the monoliths. To prove this interpretation is correct, we have to look into Todorov's theory of narrative structure. Todorov's theory that media begins with equilibrium, then a disruption to equilibrium occurs, then an opportunity of resolution, then returns to equilibrium. Most films follow this structure throughout the entire film. 2001: A Space Odyssey does things differently, as each of these 3 acts follow this entire structure, as if each act is a short film in itself. A quote from Roland Barthes' Death of the Author. "Yet there is someone who understands each word in its duplicity, and understands further, one might say, the very deafness of the characters speaking in front of him. This someone is precisely the reader, or here the spectator. In this way is revealed the whole being of writing." Roland Barthes' Death of the Author applies to 2001, in that it summarizes the concept of interpretation within the film, as what goes on in the film is very much left to the eye of the beholder to explain. The scene that is the most mysterious in origin is the ending right after the Stargate sequence. When I watched 2001 for the first time, I didn't see much significance in the set design and the time-irrelevant aging of the main character, until I listened to an interview with the director Stanley Kubrick in 1980, some 12 years after the film was released, in which he states his interpretation of the ending. But the way 2001 is written and directed, there is no definitive answers to the questions it raises. During this interview, Stanley Kubrick explains he, main character, was taken by a godlike entity creature of pure energy and intelligence and put in what you could call a human zoo. They chose this room, which is a very inaccurate replica of French architecture, deliberately so, because one would suggest that they had an idea of what a human might find attractive to the eye, much as we do with animals in zoos. It's almost like they've been interfering with our evolution by way of the monoliths, but still don't understand humans, even though we are comparatively inferior intellectually. Another theoretical analysis in the film is that HAL stands for heuristically algorithmic computer, which implies that it is capable of learning for itself, thus solving problems in the same way that a human would learn, but has no emotion and is therefore unable to think compassionately, and so kills a number of humans on board because the humans consider shutting it down due to an error it makes. But Hal attributes this to a human error, as it was humans that created Hal to think that way, and sees that the actions of the humans could jeopardize the mission. Its primary focus is to ensure the mission is completed. Ray Kurzweil once said that, by 2029, I believe that we will have computers that will be indistinguishable from human intelligence in terms of the Turing test. The Turing test is surmised as a test for a computer to answer questions so that the interviewer is unable to tell if they are talking to a man or a machine. Whether or not Hal possesses this test and can be considered human is down to the eye of the beholder, and if they consider its thought processes and actions to be that of a human or machine. Hal kills humans for what it considers the greater good, and that their way of thinking conflicted with Hal's programming and logic patterns, something humans have done throughout history, as represented at the start of the film with the Dawn of Man sequence, where we see primitive man murdering his own kind for the first time due to rival behavior. I believe that these different interpretations of 2001 are not entirely relevant to fully understand the film, as 2001: A Space Odyssey has a quality that allows viewers to analyze and dissect philosophically, which many other films do not even attempt to implement. Hopefully, by understanding Marxism, narrative structure, and structuralism, and how I interpret these theories to apply to 2001, next time you watch the film, bear these in mind, and hopefully you'll have a different outlook on what is occurring before your very eyes. But remember, there is still no definitive answer, only interpretations and questions.